Hello, folks, and welcome to Courtroom Chaos, The Truth Fights Back. Buckle up, because today we're diving into a legal saga so wild it makes Perry Mason look like a snooze fest. Picture this: Karoline Leavitt, a defense attorney with a brain sharper than a Ginsu knife, stepping into a courtroom to face Judge Amy Berman Jackson, a judicial juggernaut who could probably make a statute book cry. This isn't just a trial, it's a high-stakes showdown where truth, grit, and a dash of "did she just do that?" collide. Ready to have your mind blown? Let's jump in. The courtroom in Washington, D.C. was buzzing like a beehive on espresso. The air was thick with tension, smelling faintly of old law books, polished wood, and the kind of drama that could power a Netflix series. Journalists scribbled like their pens were on fire. Spectators whispered like they were swapping state secrets, and Karoline Leavitt stood at the defense table, cool as a cucumber in a freezer. She was a legal rock star, known for slicing through cases with the precision of a sushi chef. But today? Today was different. Today, she was up against a system that seemed to have it out for her client, and maybe her too. Her client, facing charges so serious they could have starred in a true crime podcast, was counting on Karoline to pull off a miracle. The prosecution, led by James Harrington, a guy so slick he probably practiced his smirks in the mirror, was ready to throw the book at them. The case was a media circus, with headlines screaming louder than a toddler at a toy store. Karoline had spent months building an airtight defense, digging through evidence like an archaeologist hunting for the Holy Grail. This wasn't just about saving her client, it was about proving the justice system wasn't a rigged slot machine. The room went silent as Judge Amy Berman Jackson swept in, her robe swishing like a low-budget superhero cape. Known as the Iron Bench, she was tougher than a $2 steak and twice as intimidating. Her rulings were legendary, her demeanor so no-nonsense it could star in a TED Talk on discipline. Karoline had studied Jackson's playbook, but today, the air felt heavier, like the courtroom was holding its breath for a plot twist. Judge Jackson's gavel hit the bench with a crack that echoed like a firecracker in a library. "Order!" she barked, her voice slicing through the room. "And if anyone's phone goes off, I'm personally turning it into a paperweight." The crowd swapped nervous glances. With Jackson, you didn't test the waters, you obeyed or swam with the legal sharks. Karoline straightened, feeling every eye on her. This was her moment, and she was ready to sling truth like a slingshot. Jackson outlined the day's proceedings, her tone as warm as a January breeze. Karoline sensed trouble brewing, like a storm cloud with a bad attitude. She launched into her opening arguments, calm and precise, laying out facts like a chef plating a Michelin star dish. "Your Honor, the evidence will show my client's innocence is clearer than a sunny day in July," she said, her words sharp enough to cut through the prosecution's swagger. But as she spoke, she caught Jackson's eyes narrowing, like a hawk spotting a field mouse. Something was off. The tension built like a pressure cooker with a stuck valve. Karoline was mid-sentence, dropping a bombshell about a key witness, when Jackson's voice cut in like a guillotine. "Mrs. Leavitt, you are in contempt of court." The words hit like a thunderbolt, and the room gasped like they'd just seen a magic trick go wrong. Karoline's heart skipped a beat, but her face stayed poker player cool. Contempt? For what? She'd been playing by the rules, unless being too good at your job was suddenly a crime. The gavel slammed again, louder than a rock concert finale. "I order you taken into custody immediately," Jackson declared, her tone colder than a polar bear's toenails. U.S. Marshals at the back of the room stood, moving with the slow, deliberate menace of movie henchmen. The gallery froze, jaws dropping like they were watching a plot twist in a soap opera. Karoline's mind raced. Custody? In front of everyone? This was not the vibe she'd signed up for. The Marshals' boots echoed on the floor, each step a countdown to chaos. Karoline felt the weight of the moment, reporters scribbling, spectators gaping, her client looking like he'd just seen a ghost. But Karoline Leavitt didn't crumble. She'd faced tougher odds, like that time she argued a case while battling a flu that felt like a personal vendetta. She raised a hand, calm as a Zen master. "Your Honor," she said, her voice slicing through the silence like a hot knife through butter. "Before you send me to the slammer, I humbly request you review these documents." The Marshals froze, looking like they'd just been asked to solve quantum physics. Karoline's assistant, a law student so eager he probably dreamed in case law, darted forward, slapping a sealed folder on the judge's bench like it was the Holy Grail. The gallery held its breath, because this was peak drama. Karoline had just thrown a legal Hail Mary, and everyone wanted to see if it would land. Jackson stared at the folder like it was a suspicious package, her fingers hovering like she was deciding whether to open Pandora's box. The silence stretched, thicker than fog in a horror movie. Karoline stood tall, locking eyes with Jackson, her heart pounding but her vibe screaming, "I've got this." Finally, Jackson spoke, her tone neutral but edged with curiosity. "I'll take a brief recess to review these materials." The gavel hit, and the room exhaled like it had been holding its breath since breakfast. Karoline felt a spark of hope. She'd tossed the judge a curveball, and now it was game on. The recess was less a break and more a everyone lose their minds quietly intermission. Reporters whispered like they were plotting a heist, spectators swapped theories like they were at a conspiracy convention, and Karoline stood at the defense table, her brain running at warp speed. Her assistant, looking like he'd aged a decade in 10 minutes, hovered nearby, clutching more files like they were life rafts. The prosecution team, led by Harrington, sat across the room, their earlier smirks replaced by uh-oh faces. Karoline replayed the moment in her head. Contempt? For presenting facts? It was like being sent to detention for acing a test. But she'd been ready for resistance. Jackson's reputation wasn't built on handing out gold stars. The folder she'd handed over was her ace, packed with evidence so explosive it could have starred in a Michael Bay movie. It wasn't just about saving her client, it was about exposing a system glitch that could have sent an innocent person to jail. The courtroom doors creaked open, and Judge Jackson returned, her face unreadable, like a sphinx with a law degree. The room went silent, the kind of quiet where you could hear a pen drop, or, in this case, a reporter's coffee cup hitting the floor, because of course it did. Jackson took her seat, adjusting her robe like she was prepping for a heavyweight bout. "We will now resume," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a laser. Karoline stood, her pulse racing, but her demeanor cooler than a polar plunge. Jackson flipped through the folder, her eyes scanning pages with the focus of a hawk. She paused, her brow furrowing like she'd just found a plot hole in a bestseller. "Mrs. Leavitt," she began, her tone steady but laced with something new. "Concern, maybe? These documents suggest the prosecution withheld evidence that could have cleared your client. That's troubling." Karoline seized the moment. "Troubling's an understatement, Your Honor. These documents are the smoking gun in a legal whodunit. They prove the prosecution buried witness statements that screamed, 'My client's innocent,' louder than a foghorn at a silent retreat." The gallery buzzed, because nothing says drama like a lawyer calling out foul play. Harrington shifted in his seat, looking like he'd just realized his fly was down in front of a live audience. Jackson's gaze flicked to the prosecution table, where Harrington's team sat, their confidence melting faster than ice cream in a microwave. "This isn't a small accusation," she said, her voice sharp. "If true, it's a violation of everything this system stands for." Karoline nodded, her voice steady. "It's not just a violation, Your Honor. It's a betrayal. My client's constitutional rights were tossed in the shredder, and I'm here to tape them back together." Jackson leaned back, her fingers steepled like she was plotting a chess move. "I need more than troubling, Mrs. Leavitt. I need concrete proof this wasn't a clerical oopsie." Karoline was ready. She reached for a second set of papers, prepped like a chef with a mise en place. "Your Honor, these emails between prosecution team members are spicier than a tabloid scandal. They show a deliberate plan to hide evidence, dated days before trial, with instructions to keep the defense in the dark." The assistant handed the papers to the clerk, who passed them to Jackson like they were handling a live grenade. The judge's eyes scanned the emails, her lips tightening like she'd just bitten into a lemon-flavored plot twist. The gallery leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Karoline watched Jackson closely, noting the subtle shift in her posture. From untouchable overlord to, "Okay, this is serious." The room was so quiet, you could have heard a gavel drop. Jackson spoke, her voice low but intense. "This isn't oversight. This is a coordinated effort to bury the truth. It's a disgrace to the law." The gallery gasped, because hearing Jackson call out misconduct was like watching a unicorn do a backflip. Karoline felt a wave of relief. She'd cracked the case wide open. She glanced at her client, whose eyes were wide with hope, like he'd just won the legal lottery. Jackson turned to Harrington, her gaze sharper than a samurai sword. "Mr. Harrington, explain these emails. Now." Harrington stood, his face paler than a ghost at a tanning salon. "Your Honor, I wasn't aware of these communications. I need time to review," he stammered, his slick persona crumbling like a stale cookie. Karoline knew this was the turning point. The prosecution's house of cards was collapsing, and she'd just pulled the final Jenga piece. Jackson's voice hardened. "Mrs. Leavitt, your evidence is compelling. I'll consider it carefully and take steps to ensure justice is served." Karoline nodded, her heart racing, but her vibe screaming, "Mission accomplished." The gavel hit, signaling another recess, and the room erupted in hushed chaos. Reporters scribbling, spectators whispering, and the prosecution team looking like they'd just been told their Netflix subscription was canceled. The recess was a whirlwind of what just happened energy. Reporters darted outside to file stories, their phones buzzing like a swarm of angry bees. Karoline stayed at the defense table, her mind racing through next steps. Her assistant, still clutching files like they were his security blanket, whispered, "You're a legend." Karoline smirked. "Legends don't sweat, kid. They strategize." Across the room, Harrington's team huddled, their whispers frantic, like they were trying to rewrite history before the judge returned. Karoline replayed the moment. Jackson's shift from skeptic to "this is bad" was huge, but the battle wasn't over. The emails were damning, but Jackson's reputation for caution meant she'd dig deep before ruling. Karoline had more ammo if needed, testimony from a DOJ whistleblower ready to spill the tea on the prosecution's dirty laundry. This wasn't just about her client anymore. It was about exposing a system that sometimes played fast and loose with the truth. The doors opened and Jackson returned, her face a mask of determination. The gavel cracked, silencing the room like a teacher shushing a rowdy class. "Mrs. Leavitt," she began, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that could shake the legal world. "After reviewing your evidence, I've reached a ruling." The gallery leaned forward, pens poised, hearts pounding. Karoline stood, her pulse racing but her demeanor cooler than a penguin on ice. "The charges against the defendant are dismissed with prejudice," Jackson declared, her words hitting like a legal earthquake. "The prosecution knowingly withheld exculpatory evidence, violating the defendant's rights. This court will not tolerate such misconduct." The room exploded in gasps, like the audience at a surprise movie ending. Karoline's client let out a shaky breath, his eyes shining with relief. He was free, free, after months of living in a legal nightmare. But Jackson wasn't done. She turned to the prosecution, her gaze colder than a Siberian winter. "Mr. Harrington, this court is referring your team's actions to the Office of Professional Responsibility for a full investigation. This behavior is a stain on the justice system." Harrington sank into his chair, looking like he'd just been told his law degree was printed on a napkin. His team sat frozen, their earlier bravado replaced by "we're so screwed" vibes. Jackson continued, her voice unwavering. "I'm also ordering a review of all cases handled by this prosecution team over the past 5 years. If this misconduct happened here, it may have happened elsewhere. We will root it out." The gallery buzzed, because this wasn't just a ruling, it was a reckoning. Karoline felt a surge of vindication. She'd fought for her client, but she'd also sparked a chain reaction that could change the system. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, Jackson did something unprecedented. "Let the record show," she said, her voice softening, "that my initial contempt ruling against Mrs. Leavitt was premature. I failed to fully consider her evidence, and for that, I take responsibility. I will self-report this to the Judicial Conduct Committee." The room went silent, then erupted in murmurs. A judge admitting fault? That was rarer than a unicorn riding a unicycle. Karoline's jaw nearly dropped, but she kept her cool because legends don't gape. Jackson's gavel hit, closing the session with a sound that echoed like a victory bell. The crowd spilled out, reporters sprinting to their cameras, shouting about historic rulings and prosecution scandals. Karoline packed her files, her assistant grinning like he'd just won the legal Super Bowl. "You did it," he whispered. Karoline smirked. "We did it, kid. Truth's a team sport." Outside, the courthouse steps were a circus, cameras flashing, reporters yelling, and a crowd cheering like Karoline was a rock star. A law student approached, clutching a notebook like it was her lifeline. "Mrs. Leavitt, you're my hero. You showed the system can't hide from the truth." Karoline smiled, her voice warm but firm. "The system's not perfect, but it's ours to fix. Truth's the best wrecking ball." Her assistant added, "And coffee. Don't forget coffee." The fallout was seismic. Within days, the case was national news, with headlines screaming prosecution caught red-handed and judges' rare apology shocks legal world. Congress jumped in, holding hearings on prosecutorial misconduct, inspired by Karoline's guts and Jackson's accountability. Lawmakers proposed bills for stricter evidence disclosure rules, transparency measures, and accountability for rogue prosecutors. Karoline's case became the spark that lit a reform fire, burning through decades of "that's just how it's done" excuses. Karoline was thrust into the spotlight, invited to speak at law schools, conferences, and TV panels. She stayed humble because heroes don't need capes, they need conviction. "This wasn't about me," she'd say. "It was about making sure no one else gets railroaded by a system that's supposed to protect them." Her reputation soared, but it was her legacy. Reforms that would protect future defendants that mattered most. Judge Jackson, too, became a figure of admiration. Her self-reporting earned her praise as a model of judicial integrity, a judge who put fairness above ego. Letters poured in, from law professors to everyday citizens, thanking her for showing the system could correct itself. She continued to advocate for transparency, her courtroom a beacon for those who believe justice should evolve. The prosecution team faced the music. The Office of Professional Responsibility dug into their cases, uncovering a pattern of corner-cutting that led to overturned convictions and public apologies. New protocols rolled out, mandatory evidence logs, whistleblower protections, and training to keep prosecutors from pulling a "whoops, lost the truth, move again." Law schools added Karoline's case to their curricula, teaching it as a masterclass in ethical courage and systemic change. For Karoline, the victory was bittersweet. She'd won her client's freedom and exposed a flaw in the system, but the fight for justice was a marathon, not a sprint. She kept advocating, working with reform groups to push for transparency and fairness. "One case doesn't fix everything," she'd say, "but it's a damn good start." Her client, now free, rebuilt his life, forever grateful for the lawyer who turned a courtroom into a truth-telling arena. Years later, the ripples of that trial were still felt. Reforms strengthened the system, protecting defendants and rebuilding public trust. Karoline's name became synonymous with justice, a reminder that one person armed with evidence and guts could change the game. Judge Jackson's self-reporting set a standard for accountability, proving even the bench wasn't above the law. Together, they showed the world that justice isn't a gavel or a robe, it's a promise to do right no matter the cost. What a wild ride, right? Karoline Leavitt's courtroom showdown proves one thing. Truth hits harder than a gavel when you've got the courage to swing it. What do you think of her epic battle? Would you have stood your ground like she did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to hear. If this story lit a fire in you, smash that like button, share it with your crew, and subscribe for more tales of grit, truth, and holy cow. Did that just happen? Moments. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one, where justice might just throw another curveball.